Welcome to the next video in the series of judge training videos for the Pi Kappa Delta National Tournament. This video will discuss public address events and how to go about judging and what to look for with these events. So specifically, we'll talk about the 4 public address events in this video. We'll talk about after dinner speaking, we'll talk about communication analysis, informative speaking, and persuasive speaking. We'll actually talk about them in a little bit different order after covering some general elements to consider with all public address events, but we'll go into details about each one of these 4 speech events. First, just a couple of general things to consider with all 4 public address events. These are the events that are what most people think of when they think of public speaking. So they have a couple of qualities that are true for all 4 event genres. First, these speeches should be memorized. There may be 1 or 2 competitors at the tournament who are reading their speeches, but they should be ranked last in their round. Otherwise, everyone else should have their speeches memorized. The speeches can be at most 10 minutes long. Most will come in between 8 minutes and 30 seconds and about 10 minutes. But they're all in that same time frame. So all 4 events, the maximum time limit is 10 minutes. All of these events may incorporate visual aids, so some students may have some posters or something else that they incorporate in their speech. That can also be scored and considered when you're judging between the different events. All these speeches should be delivered in a conversational tone, so it shouldn't feel as though they're yelling at you. It shouldn't be too quiet so that you can't hear. It should be in a general, comfortable tone that's easy to understand and that is comfortable for you as the listener. And finally, they should discuss something that's interesting or important. The topic should be relevant. It should be something that they try to make you care about, and those should be factors that you consider as well. So if you think a speech is about an uninteresting topic, and so you decide that it's not as impressive or as qualified as some of the other events, that you can rank that lower in the round. But generally speaking, those are the things that are true for all 4 different events. Now we'll go into the specifics of each different event category. The first event we'll talk about is informative speaking. Here is the event description, and one of the nice things about forensics is that these are the only rules for informative speaking. There are some general norms about, well, speeches are usually 3 points and each point is equal in length, but those aren't requirements. These rules right in front of you are the only requirements for informative speaking. So the speech should talk about something, a realistic subject that either fulfills the general aim of enlightening or otherwise intriguing the audience. They can use visual aids. They should be using sources to support their speech. They can have notes if they'd like. Usually notes are considered note cards if they have some new information that they want to include. And the maximum time is 10 minutes. But the goal of an informative speech is to do just that, to tell you about something interesting and to inform you about something that you care about, that's relevant, that's important, or otherwise is intriguing. Persuasive speaking is very similar, except in this case, instead of just informing you about the topic, they're going to persuade you to either inspire you to reinforce your previous beliefs, to change your beliefs, change your attitudes, maybe impact your values, or to convince you to adopt some action or to do something. In this case, they may use audiovisual aids just as before. They should be using source materials to support their speech. They can use minimal notes, and the maximum time limit is 10 minutes. The key with a persuasive speech is that they're trying to change something about the way you think or the way that you act. So you can rank the speeches in this round based off of how persuasive they were. Maybe some of them made a really strong case for their cause or their issue. Maybe others didn't do so as much. So you can consider that when you're ranking the speeches. But the persuasive speeches should try to convince you to change your beliefs or to change your actions. After dinner speaking is very similar to a persuasive speech, except that it focuses far more on the development of humor as a persuasive technique. So these speeches should be humorous in nature. They can be informative, but most are persuasive. They should have sound composition, be thematically coherent, and they should be in good taste, and feel free if a speech is not in good taste to penalize them. Students, of course, like to push the boundaries and try to make jokes that are as far as they can go without offending their audience, and of course, sometimes they go too far, so feel free to conclude that in your speech. The key is, though, is that this should not resemble any sort of nightclub act or an impersonation or some sort of stand-up comic. it should feel like an actual speech that is using jokes to add in persuasion. So think something like a Jon Stewart monologue from The Daily Show, or something that Stephen Colbert might do, or John Oliver. Very similar to that, where they're using the humor as a persuasive vehicle. So you can include that in your ranking categories for the speech. They may include visual aids, which may include posters. They may have props. They can have minimal notes if they like, and the maximum time limit is, again, 10 minutes. But the key here is that the speech is supposed to use humor to persuade. And lastly, we have communication analysis. This is very similar to informative speaking or persuasive speaking, but they're focused on a specific communication event or artifact or speech. And the goal of their presentation is to critique that speech using either communication or rhetorical theory, and to tell you why it's important, to draw some implications from that event. So for example, they may look at a political speech, they'll analyze it with a theory, they'll show you that that's an appropriate way to look at the speech, and then they'll tell you why that's important and what we can learn from that analysis. So it's sometimes seen as a little bit more in-depth in its analysis, but it's all focused around one specific event. And it's the key is that the student is supposed to explain their theory. If they decide that they're just not going to give you an in-depth description and just assume that you know, you can penalize them on the ballot. It's their job to inform a general audience about this topic. So it's up to them to explain it well enough that everyone understands. But it's supposed to focus around that communication event. So here are a couple of judging tips to keep in mind when you're judging public address. First is that you can write critiques on both the content and the delivery. So if one speaker has really great content but they're stumbly, you can use that as part of your ranking criteria. If their delivery is fantastic but the content is pretty light, it's not really telling you a whole lot, you can factor that in. Of course, if they're doing well on both, you can comment on both. If they need help in both areas, you can comment on both there as well. So you can factor both in your decision. Feel free to write comments on the ballot during the speech. In fact, I would highly encourage that. With the way that the rounds are scheduled, you'll want to write your comments while they're speaking. That way they can come out fresh as you are interpreting the speech in real time. It will also save you time at the end of the round because the ballots will be filled out with all of your comments. You'll just have to go back and add scores. So I would really endeavor to write all of your comments while they're speaking. And speaking of those comments, I would include and suggest that you offer areas that they can improve. So focus on what's not going well or what's not working for you and why and what they could do to improve it. But also give them some helpful comments about, hey, you're doing this really well, or you're a great speaker, you have really great delivery. Offer them some areas of encouragement as well. But of course, diagnose what they could do better. And finally, and I tell this to all people who judge for me, is trust your gut impression. The goal of forensics is to train students to be able to speak to a general audience. So they should be able to go in front of any crowd and talk about their topic. If they're not doing that, if they're not trying to make sure that it's broad enough that everyone can access it, that's a problem for them, not for you as the judge. You're the judge in the round, so your opinion is what matters. If they don't explain something, that burden is on them. As long as you're paying attention and doing your best to understand their topic, if it's not clear, that's not your fault. And so you can write those sort of comments on the ballot. But trust your gut impressions. If you think one speech is better than another, just write down why on the ballot. Even if you feel like someone else may rank them differently, that doesn't matter. It's just your impressions, and that's what matters. So this video described the specifics to consider with all of the 4 public speaking events. So as you're judging these events, think about whether the speech, if after dinner speech, was the humor topical? Was it something that made you laugh but also persuaded you? Communication analysis, did they effectively use theory to draw some sort of implications or analysis from the communication event? Informative speech, did you learn something? Did you like what they had to say? Was it interesting? And persuasive speaking, did they move you to change your beliefs or to change your attitudes? Or if they didn't, did they do a good job in attempting to do so? So just think about those elements when you judge each of these events, and subsequent videos will talk about other event genres and what to consider in those events.